G'day everyone, thanks for joining us today for our latest Meet Your Okta Identity Experts podcast. We're recording live from Sydney, Australia today. This is your host, Clarence Chair. I'm the Director of Sales Engineering at Okta for Asia Pacific, and it's my absolute pleasure today to be hosting the podcast. So for the Meet Your Okta Identity Experts podcast today, we get up and close and personal to meet and chat with some of our best and brightest Okta experts in the region. Today, we're very excited to have one of our very best, Dean Comben, Principal Technical Consultant for Okta based in Brisbane, Australia, to have a chat with us on the show. Hey Dean, how are you going?
Good, thanks Clarence. Thanks for having me.
That's excellent. So it's great to catch up and have you on the podcast today. Before we begin, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and your role at Okta?
Prior to joining Okta, I've kind of been working in identity and access management for about 7 years. So prior to that, I worked in financial services. And there I was really responsible for looking after the identity platform around both internal and external use cases, so both internal staff and consumer-facing applications, all the way from like web apps to mobile apps and things like that. And sort of prior to that, I had a background in infrastructure and software engineering, but my real passion is security, hence the identity part of my career. And I've been at Okta for around 2 years in the professional services team, and my role is to really help our customers solve their tricky identity problems and help guide them through that deployment process and ensure they're successful.
Excellent. So I'm sure our listeners are keen to learn more about you. So do you want to tell us a bit more about what you like doing outside of work?
Yeah, sure. I really love to get outdoors. So I'm based up in sunny Brisbane, and the geography around Brisbane, we've got sort of the coast one side and we've got the forest the other side. So I like to get out camping and forward driving, hiking, scuba diving. We've got the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef there. And recently I've started doing bouldering, which is like indoor rock climbing.
Wow, nice. I agree. No better spot in the world to be doing things like that. And a bit of a plug for our sunny Queensland in Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
Good work. Okay, so we've got here a passionate security technologist. Deep experience in identity. Someone with a love for outdoor fun. So how did someone like yourself end up at Okta? And what brought you here?
Okay, so in my previous role, I was really wrangling with on-premise identity and access management technology.
Yeah.
It was difficult to maintain, hard to customize without creating a lot of technical debt, which would then make upgrades really hard. And really what I wanted to be able to do is offer identity and access as a commoditized service to the business. And I thought surely other companies are wanting to do the same thing, and I could really see that the future around that was cloud. You'd seen Amazon do things like commoditize the compute layer and then the database layer, and it just made sense that eventually we work our way up the stack. Identity was the next thing, and I saw Okta and identity as a cloud service made perfect sense to me, and that was really the core reason around joining Okta.
Well, thanks for that background, Dean. I agree. Cloud has been a game changer, and identity as a service in the cloud, it's totally changed the game. But I wanted to go back to that point you raised about cloud as a future, and deep dive on that a little bit more, right? So at Okta, we've seen a explosion of cloud. You mentioned AWS, but whether it's a SaaS or a PaaS or infrastructure as a service, we're seeing customers adopt cloud at various different maturity levels, right? Some are having a cloud first policy, and some even a cloud only policy, right? So I guess I'm curious that what are you seeing as the drivers behind all this, and what has been the trends that you're seeing in your experience?
Yeah, so certainly at Okta, we certainly see a lot of organizations that are rapidly adopting cloud services. It's really a trend across various industries that just companies going and adopting these cloud services just through the ease of use. And this ability to go out into the market and select the best of breed applications. And what that's resulted in for organizations is this sort of fragmented application architecture where if you're thinking about writing a custom application, you might go and use a service like Twilio for telephony type services, and you might use, say, Salesforce for your CRM type things, and bringing all that together into a single application. So yeah, that's been interesting. Sorry about that. I've lost it.
Do you want to start again?
Should we start that one again, or?
Maybe start from the question.
Yeah, I'll start from the question again.
I lost it because of the cough.
No, you're doing great. So I'll start from the question again. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that background, Dean. So I wanted to go back to that point you raised about seeing, cloud as the future and deep dive on that a bit more, right? So at Okta, we're definitely seeing the trend where, explosion of cloud adoption and, customers at various different maturity levels, right? Some are having like a cloud first policy and some are even having like a cloud only policy, right? But wanted to hear from you though, based on your experience and observations, what are you seeing as some of the underlying driver? Like why are customers choosing this path?
Yeah, so you're right. We certainly see a lot of our customers, especially at Okta, adopting cloud services. And I mean, there's the whole general approach around just wanting to reduce their cost and that difficulty around managing on-premise applications, like I spoke about a bit earlier. But also this theme of opting for best-of-breed applications, which really results in having applications all over the place, and they might be through various cloud vendors. And then there's this new cloud-based services like Twilio and other APIs around this that result in this fragmented application architecture. So you might have your business logic held across various cloud providers, and then your presentation layer for your application could be like a single page app or a mobile application.
Or even something like an Alexa.
Exactly. And the real key to this is identity is really this glue that ties all of these various services together. It's the one common theme between the various applications and APIs.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Look, I think whether it's adopting a set of cloud services or rolling out a game-changing digital service to end users, right? I think the opportunities that are now available for all of us and the pace and the affordability of these services has really opened up organizations to many of these to take advantage of many of these disruptions, right? And I think, as you said, API identity API is a fundamental building block of all this, and I'm sure you'd agree because I noticed that yesterday you were clearly spotted wearing a T-shirt with a JSON symbol in the middle, and there was an Okta logo as a payload. So I'm sure you'd agree that API plays a big role in this. It was very cool, but since this is not a fashion podcast, I thought we'll get back into the technical discussion here. So things have evolved a lot, right? So from your traditional web apps in the past to now these API-based services. Can you talk us through a bit more, some examples maybe of this evolution?
Yeah, so I guess a few customer examples that come to mind. So a single page app for a consumer-facing insurance portal. The issue where there were multiple back-end systems with APIs exposed via an API gateway. So the challenge was really around securing the client side of things. Securing the API layer, and the app is obviously on the client side. So really, it's really critical to ensure that security layer on the API is there, and the Okta API management is really important to allow you to link that identity context back to the APIs between the web app and the API.
Right.
Like the old way of doing security would have been around service accounts. So like an application would have a service account, and that would be used for all users of the application, integrating back to that API. But a more modern approach is really using that end user identity context and passing that information back down to the API.
Yeah.
So it knows, what that user should have access and what they shouldn't have access to.
Yeah. So, what you're saying, I guess there was, you had existing applications and systems where you're exposing the APIs, and it's important that you get that API security layer right, because you don't want to risk exposing that with, service accounts, or you can't actually audit who they are coming in.
Exactly.
You really want to, manage that access properly with that layer. But, can you talk a bit more about the mobile apps though? Because I think mobile apps are a little bit different from your traditional, web apps. So, yeah, maybe some experience on how you've tackled that problem in the past?
Yeah, I mean, mobile apps are interesting in that because they're on someone's device, they can't keep a secret, basically. It's one way to put it. So in terms of the Oauth Flows and the OpenID Connect flow to do single sign-on, we need to make sure that we're not storing any sensitive information on the mobile app itself.
Yeah.
So there's certain OpenID Connect flows and Oauth Flows that are designed around this specific problem. So ensuring that people actually use these flows as opposed to some of the other flows that are designed for your traditional web apps,
right,
that have a server-side component.
Yeah. So whilst people talk about, hey, is this OAuth 2 compliant, but really you have to be careful of picking what flows within that OAuth 2 spec, which are appropriate for the different types of apps that you're building.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and I definitely agree with your point around, some of these modern authentication flows, because with mobile apps, for example, you really want to go down to that minimal authentication approach, right? You want to authenticate as little as possible so that users can enjoy a good experience using the app, but in the meantime, you want them to be protected, right? So what sort of security considerations should we have in mind when you're building such a modern app architecture to balance the two?
So in terms of security, I mean, the one to start with is really TLS at that transport layer. These days, there's no excuse for not using TLS, and it's actually required as part of the OpenID and OAuth specs.
Yeah.
It's mandatory that you have that encrypted. And there's approaches like previously organizations might not have wanted to pay for their CA certificates. They can be expensive. And there's places like Let's Encrypt that offer those for free now. So
there's really no excuse now, right?
Really no excuse. And like it's absolutely key. The other aspect is it's key to protect the APIs with the right security. You can think about the API layer as really being your business logic layer, and it's holding all your core business data. So ensuring you have that well protected, and standards like OAuth help with that around defining scopes and how people interact with those APIs, as we spoke about with the different Oauth flows. Some of the other security considerations specific to OpenID Connect and OAuth are around the public and private apps, which we were just talking about in the context of a mobile app. There's certain whitelisting around the redirect URIs, and then there's also the validation of the tokens themselves. So each token is signed with a certificate, so ensuring that the signature is valid. And there's certain other attributes within the token, such as the issuer and the audience, that should also be checked by the clients that are consuming those tokens.
Oh, some great advice there, Dean. So it's not just about, hey, let's just secure the network tunnel. It's not just about OAuth 2 compliant. You really got to know what you're building and designing in security best practices at each component layer.
Yeah, exactly.
As I see it. Good stuff. So Now we all know this space is moving so quickly, and I'm sure our listeners are keen to understand, what are some of the things that are coming down the pipeline? What should we be expecting, and what sort of things are trends that are coming in the future?
I guess one that everyone probably already knows about these days is IoT. I mean, that's already exploding, and I've got light bulbs in my house that require firmware updates, which always makes me laugh.
Of course you do.
Yeah. And so we're seeing different ways of these types of devices authenticating and interacting with various services on your behalf. And you can think about even Amazon Alexa and cases like that, where Alexa might be calling out to other external services on your behalf. And that's where these new modern authentication flows are really important. Probably the next theme is really around passwordless authentication. Passwords are a bit nonsensical in that it's something that's meant to be easy to remember but hard for someone else to guess. So I think we'll start to see, and we're already seeing it with mobiles these days, with things like Face ID and biometric, like fingerprint authentication. So I think we'll continue to see that evolve to the point where hopefully we don't need to remember passwords anymore.
That'd be great. And what about, we hear a lot of talk around risk-based authentication. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so risk-based authentication, with that one, if you think about the way we do authentication today, it's often we check the user's credentials as they're trying to enter the front door. And what risk-based authentication is really looking at is trying to determine whether they should have access based on other contexts. So things like the device, the location, IP address, the type of user agent they're connecting from, things like that. But also moving to this world where it's not just checked as you access the application, but throughout your session, sort of more of a continuous authentication based on your context and how you're interacting with the application.
Yeah. So it's like, going through the front door of a building and a security guard's checked your badge, but the security guard is continuously following you through the office,
yeah, that's right.
in the lifts, and really paying attention to what you're doing, what you're saying, and
don't touch that, put that down.
Excellent. So yeah, that would be, I think in a connected world, that would become a mandatory pattern, wouldn't it? Where you trust nobody and you're continuously authenticating and looking at risk and how to mitigate it. So look, great point, Dean. I think technology innovations have always been, have always created barriers, right, for when it comes to security. But what you've highlighted there is, instead of treating that as a barrier and creating gaps, we should embrace it. We should leverage these new technologies and try and add it to the security arsenal and try and use it to our advantage. So great insight, Dean, as always, and really thank you so much for being here and sharing with us a lot of insight and deep diving into a number of areas around there. So there we have it, folks. A great catch up with Dean Comben, Principal Technical Consultant for Okta Asia Pacific. As you can see, one of our best and brightest identity experts in the region. So we talked about Dean's personal journey, the evolution of cloud-driven architectures and modern application architectures, how API is core and center to this world, and how APIs are presenting opportunities for us, and important that we get the API access management model right. We also touched on what else is coming and what we should be doing to prepare for it. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to sharing more of these insights with you in our future Meet Your Okta Identity Experts podcast. Thank you.